Salut, ça va? Moi, je vais bien. Aujourd'hui, nous commençons la première leçon du chapitre 4 à la page 148 du livre de texte. Mais il faut lire page 140 avant la première leçon, le passé composé, avant de commencer, bien sûr. This chapter concentrates on three past tenses, one of which we will go over today, which is called le passé composé, which is the very basic past tense of all the other past tenses. This page right here, page 148, actually lists some of the irregular verbs with irregular past tenses. So if you see a verb like parler, parler is a regular, versus avoir, which is irregular because avoir verbs like avoir, être, faire, they're very commonly used in French and they're conjugated irregularly, so their past tense forms are irregular as well. But instead of looking at these two page numbers and just memorizing the past participles, first and foremost, I would like to do an activity reviewing just the simple past tense for those of you that need a review on it. And there's a little more information on the next page, on page 149, which I'm pretty sure not many of you are familiar with, but we'll go over it in a moment. But for now, let's talk about a couple of verbs. So you know that in the past tense, we use two verbs, or two parts, a helping verb and then, or also called the auxiliary helping verb, and then a past participle. So there are two parts. It's called a bipartite tense, the past tense that is. So you have one of two helping verbs, avoir, for example, j'ai, or être, je suis. Okay, je suis. Now, let's look at this list of verbs right here. Habiter, manger, dormir, rendu visite. Now, to put these in the past tense, do you say je suis or do you say j'ai? Je suis or j'ai? The correct answer is j'ai. So avoir is the helping verb for these verbs. Habiter, manger, dormir, rendre visite. Now remember with rendre visite means to visit somebody. The er verb visiter means to visit a place. So whether you're visiting a place or a person, make sure that you note the correct verb because they are different in French. How about for these verbs right here? Aller, arriver, né, or venu. Is it j'ai allé or je suis allé? J'ai allé, je suis allé. The correct answer is être. Je suis allé. Now, as you'll notice, there's an E in parentheses in the end of all of those, and I will explain that in a minute if you don't know. With another set of verbs. Arriver, partir, devenu, tomber. Is it je suis arrivé or j'ai arrivé? The correct answer is je suis as well, just like in the last question. Je suis arrivé, je suis parti, je suis devenu, je suis tombé. Now, the reason why there's an E in all of these, including the ones from the other list, is because verbs that are conjugated using être as the auxiliary or helping verb do have to agree by gender and number, but in this case, just for gender because we're only talking about one person, But if you're using like nous sommes or vous êtes or il or elle plural, make sure that you also add an s to it. The past participles do agree with gender and number. So if you're a girl, you have to add the extra e. And then if the subject is a group of women, then you have to add an s on top of the e. Okay? Now let's start looking at the list of irregular verbs that are in the book. Faire, voir, recevoir, and conduire, which is a new verb that you guys learned. Is it je suis fait or j'ai fait? J'ai fait or je suis fait? The correct answer is avoir, j'ai fait. So all of these verbs here use avoir as their helping verb. Simple enough, but the hard part is actually memorizing what the past participle is for the verb. For faire, faire, voir, recevoir, and then conduire, because it's not as regular as manger, parler, habiter, or even dormir. Now, one more set of verbs before we go on to reflexive verbs or reciprocal verbs that you guys have just learned. Descendu, passé, sorti, rentré. Is it j'ai descendu or je suis descendu? Okay, the answer is both actually. These verbs right here, also listed on page 149, they all use both je suis or j'ai. They both use avoir and then être in the past tense. Now there is a difference though. When you use these verbs with avoir as the helping verb, you don't need the e. Okay, at the end of the past participles, you only use those when you use je suis. Okay, but going back to avoir, okay, you don't need the extra e or the additional feminine e in the past participles. They mean one thing versus je suis, which could mean something else. Now, if you look in the book, j'ai descendu, they give you examples right there, which is good. J'ai descendu does not literally mean to go down. It just means you went through. For example, a street. Okay, the example in the book. Versus je suis descendu, which means you physically or literally walked down or climbed down from something. For example, you got off a bus. Je suis descendu. For passé, okay, je suis passé means to physically or literally pass through, versus j'ai passé, which means to spend time. For example, j'ai passé 2 semaines en Californie. I spent 2 weeks in California. J'ai passé. Sortir is the same thing. J'ai sorti with avoir means to take something out, whereas je suis sorti means to leave a place. You yourself left a place, so you're taking yourself out. That's the difference between avoir and être. Usually être has a more reflexive meaning, going back to yourself. Same thing with rentrer. Rentrer is a little difficult. J'ai rentré means to put away something, versus je suis rentré means you're putting yourself away, so you're coming home. Now, last and not least, the reflexive verbs, the last part in the grammar. For example, to wash, okay, to wash oneself, to call each other, to talk to each other, and then this verb you guys know, to get along well. These verbs, along with all the other reflexive verbs in French, use être. So, if they use être, And the reflexive, then the reflexive pronoun, which is the "se" right here, they also change. So you would say je me suis lavé, except with an E. Je me suis téléphoné, tu t'es téléphoné, il s'est téléphoné. Nous sommes, vous êtes. So that list you just have to memorize with reflexive pronouns. We won't be going over too many reflexive pronouns in this chapter as opposed to the last chapter, but it is essential to know that in the past tense you do use être instead of avoir. That's basically it in the book, so make sure that you do the activities listed in the lesson plan. Merci, bonne journée et au revoir.